Welcome to this edition of Parking Talks, where we will be discussing the topics of access and revenue control. Joining us today we have Frank, Director of Product Management and Marketing from Scheidt&Bachmann, Peter and Lester, President and Executive Vice Presidents of Sales at IP Parking, and Ronnie, Vice President of International Sales and Marketing at TIBA. Let's start with a description of Parking Access Revenue Control Systems, or PARCS. Can you help us out with that, Lester?
I think like any resource, whether it's water, food, whatever it is, they have to be managed. And the parking resource that's available to a city or to a building, the access and monetization and management of that resource is very important. And I think that's why you need a park system to do that. And that's what park systems specialize in doing. So they're going to manage and regulate access, and they're going to control the revenue that comes into the facility and give you a way to understand that, everyone that's using the facility is using it in the way that your parking rules specify. You're collecting the revenue for the transactions that you specify, and getting a report when anything happens that, different from the way you want your asset utilized.
And Ronnie, we are increasingly seeing barrierless parking solutions. Do you think this will become a norm in the future?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because different people look at what we call barrierless, or have different names for it. Some people will call it frictionless, others will call it ticketless. The real question is what's in it for the driver and what's in it for the owner of the parking lot or the operator of the parking lot. And I think everybody wants to achieve pretty much the same idea, which is to allow drivers to drive in and out of a parking lot as quickly as possible on one side, but then remain identified so that they can be charged for the actual time they stayed in. So as technologies progress, and as we see more and more ways to identify cars and drivers as they're driving in without having to slow them down, you'll see more and more what we call frictionless or ticketless system coming into effect. I think the actual barrier itself, will be the last to disappear, because it's probably the only way to slow drivers down and make sure that they were identified on entry. There is an additional factor of trying to chase the driver if said driver drove without paying for the time he used the parking space. And if there's no barrier, depending on the country, you sometimes cannot chase the driver. It's really up to the governance in that geography to see if you can just chase the driver using the license plate. So yes, I think over time you'll see that systems become more and more ticketless, frictionless, and eventually the barrier will disappear as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the physical barrier will be the last thing to go. What's your opinion on this, Frank?
Well, actually we recognize an increase of requests for ticketless parking solutions because they are really convenient. But ticketless solutions don't necessarily have to be barrierless, although those are even more convenient. But on the one hand, some parking facilities are more appropriate for barrierless than others, and on the other hand, the legal base for ticketless systems differs considerably from country to country. Therefore, I assume that it still needs some time until barrierless will become the norm, but the trend is there, and of course we are following it with the greatest interest.
And why do you think PARCS is such a key component in parking?
Because access and exit control is mandatory for a successful parking management. But access and exit control does not necessarily be equated with barriers and ticket machines. Also, barrierless solutions combined with an effective enforcement solution is a possibility to control how many cars are on your space and ensure that you don't lose revenue.
And Ronnie, what are your thoughts on PARCS in relation to enforcement?
Enforcement will depend on our ability to identify the car and the driver and the cross ownership between car and driver. Because if it's a rental car, it may be more difficult. If it's a car that belongs to a company, it may be more difficult to identify who the actual driver was. Depending on the country, the Department of Motor Vehicles will or will not expose the details of the driver to private companies. For example, in Scandinavia, it's very common to expose the details of the driver, and so it's easier to chase a driver who left without paying In other countries like Australia and the US, it's much more difficult to get the details of the driver. So really, if you don't stop the driver, and a barrier, even though it's not a real physical restraint, people can drive through it, there is some sort of a behavioral issue about it. And people see a barrier, they will stop, and typically they will pay.
The behavioral issue you mentioned is an interesting topic in itself. What are your thoughts on barrierless parking and how parkers will react to it, Peter?
Well, the concept of barrierless parking, I must say I like it because it makes the entire entrance and exits movement for the person visiting a facility, it makes it very easy, very fast. But the thing is, you need to be sure that someone who enters the facility, exits the facility, also pays for his visit. And a big problem with barrierless parking is what is the ID that you're going to use to start a transaction and to stop a transaction and to have people pay for that transaction. If that ID is the license plate, so if it's LPR based, then great, you know, you park for free for the rest of your life because you just cover a part of your plate and you can drive in and out for free, nobody can charge you anything. And it's just a matter of time before people know that you can cheat the system in such a way, and then they will do that. And especially airports, where you have to pay a lot for parking, and those airports, they are very interested in barrierless parking, but they need to be a way for that particular garage owner to make sure he gets payment.
And where do you think the trend is heading now?
I think parking of tomorrow is not about what's going on in your facility, it's what's going on in the surrounding area. And it's up to us, vendors, to make sure that we accommodate that. So that we provide ways of allowing those external data sources, apps, platforms, websites, to be able to interact with the system that is provided by a parking access and revenue control manufacturer. So that is done on a hardware level. So with a large screen that we have at entrances and exits, that it's easier to communicate with the visitor, but also on a software level. We have a large stack of APIs available that make it possible to interface with our system.
Ronnie, do you have any comments about the geographical uptake of barrierless parking?
You'll see technologies, frictionless technologies being implemented first in Europe and Australia and only at a later phase in the US. That's our assessment.
Thanks, Ronnie. So we'd like to know a little more about where you will all be focusing on. Let's start with the developments from Scheidt&Bachmann. Frank?
First of all, we are glad and happy that we have already solutions for both use cases, ticketless as well as barrierless. In the first installations in the field, we are also able to learn a lot about customers' behavior with those solutions and can improve those solutions steadily. One thing which is always of great importance is the recognition rate of the number plates via the camera. And with some special algorithms, we try to increase the rate above the rate the camera manufacturer grants, which is already pretty high. Another thing we are improving is the customer convenience. As things become so easy without tickets and barriers, also the payment has to be seamless and easy. Besides the payment method via ordinary pay station, we offer already a possibility to pay your stay via an app. Now we are working on possibilities that you are also able to pay your stay a little bit later, for example at home, if you have forgotten to pay at the parking lot because everything was so easy.
And what about with IP parking? Gentlemen?
IP parking in the US will be focusing on becoming a supplier of a service. It's not necessarily us supplying our equipment, but parking becomes more and more a service to customers. It's, of course, we sell hardware and we sell software, and so that entire package, that is what we do. But since there are so many other companies, data sources and such involved, that accommodation of all those external companies is also something that we can include in our proposition. For instance, pre-booking reservation, combination of on-street and off-street parking, and so on and so on. So for us, in the market in the US, which is very homogeneous, which is enormous. That will be our main focus and our main technology push.
I think Peter was absolutely right when he talks about the whole ecosystem that's revolved around parking. You have all these people that are trying to be as close to the customer as possible and be in the transaction. And I think our role, again, is just to put down this layer over top of the parking asset that makes that access easy. So it's not just the people that are rolling up that are using their access card or pulling a ticket. It's all those other aggregators that want to have access to your parking facility. It's been around for such a long time, but you just have to look at the airline industry. Almost anybody can sell a seat on a plane if you get connected into the layer that sits over top, of those seats. And that's exactly who we need to be. The company ethos matches perfectly with what the product that's being delivered to the field. We want to be easy to work with, and we are easy to work with. We have a flexible product, and it's a flexible company.
And finally, what can we expect to see from TIBA?
Well, TIBA is looking at this entire what we call PARCS, parking technology ecosystem, and from our understanding of customer requirements, they want to get away from legacy products. They want to be able to manage and control different types of products and different types of barriers and different types of lane equipment from one single control center without having to worry about who they purchase the equipment from. So you're going to see more and more fusion between the lane equipment, the barriers, the Bluetooth technologies that are coming out, the RFID technologies, whether short distance or long distance. There's more and more fusion that's going to happen so that you basically can control any type of equipment from any type of control center. And what TIBA is focusing its efforts on is actually creating this fusion between different types of products, not necessarily TIBA products. And we're going to come out with solutions that allow you to manage, allow access, entry, exit, reservation of different technologies, not just TIBA technology. And so that's our this is what you're going to see in the coming trade shows, let's say in the US in the next 6 months. Fusion products.
Very insightful discussion. Thank you all for participating, and we look forward to seeing all the developments in the future, and we'll see if barrierless parking becomes the norm. Don't forget that you can read the interviews in full soon on parking-net.com. If you would like to join the discussion or have any topics you'd like to see, email us at editor@parking-net.com.